What is it about this Three Mothers book that every time someone comes in contact with it, they end up in deep shit? Let's review Inferno. Inferno stars Irene Miracle, Lee McCloskey, Daria Nicolodi, and is directed by Dario Argento. What is up, guys? I'm excited. It's time to review another Italian horror film. This film is the second part of the Mothers trilogy, directed by Dario Argento. And I'm just really in an Italian horror mood lately. There's something about this genre of films that just really excites me. You know, unlike any other genre that I've discovered in the past, really. It's unique. It's very different. So, looking forward to diving into this one. I reviewed Suspiria years ago, like a couple years ago, right after I saw it. Now, remember, my late friend Dylan Clancy, he's really responsible for getting me into giallo films and Italian horror films. And it's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving, because now there are members of Killer Flicks that have never seen Italian horror that are now getting into it. So that's all because of Dylan. And Dylan, look what you've created, my friend. But anyway, really excited about Inferno. I knew that this was an interesting one. I've heard so many mixed reviews about this movie, so it was kind of nice going into it not knowing what at all to expect. Also, looking at my other camera over there, that's for my patrons. On my patron page, I try to do like vlogs, 1 or 2 vlogs a month, just so you guys can kind of see, hey, how you doing? Behind the scenes, what I'm doing, how this stuff is filmed, I guess how the magic happens, you know, my process. So I like sharing that stuff with you guys. But anyway, we're gonna jump into this movie. This can be a little intimidating, jumping into really just like this Three Mothers trilogy. And I guess I kind of have to give Daria Nicolodi a little bit of credit. She was a companion of Dario Argento's, and she was originally going to be in Suspiria, but they wanted an American actress. But before his relationship with her, he was pretty much just doing like straight up giallo types of films. And then she introduced these more like witchcraft, supernatural elements, and she had a heavy part in the screenplay for Suspiria. So we can kind of thank her, and she does have a part in this movie as Elise, for forcing Argento to come out of his comfort zone and try different flavors of horror. And he created Suspiria, which is in my top 10 favorite horror films of all time. But Inferno really is the introduction of that whole Mothers trilogy, and just the idea that this could be a trilogy, and Inferno being the second part of that. And this Mothers trilogy, it's based off of these like poems from like the mid 1800s, and it's transformed into this elaborate project that Argento wanted to tackle. And the basic idea of it is there's 3 camps, 3 I guess coven camps. You got the Rome camp. You have the New York camp, which is pretty much what Inferno is. It covers that part. And then you have this camp in Germany, this witch coven in Germany. You know, these are different establishments. Like in Suspiria, it was this dance school. And here in New York, it's really just a hotel, like an apartment complex. I have not seen the third part of this, the Mother of Tears. I will eventually get to that one. But Inferno offers a lot of interesting ideas, and like I said, this is the one that delves deeper, I guess literally, because the opening scene of this movie, we have our character Rose, who lives in this apartment complex, and she goes into this cellar. And in the cellar, that's where you see a lot of those like Suspiria colors. You know, you're going to see a lot of the reds and the blues, and they combine, and you get the purples. I would even say this movie gets a little bit pretentious in terms of its color palette. It's beautiful, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it's like, it's a little bit unrealistic as how these colors just randomly just pop up out of nowhere. But anyway, I guess she's kind of a main character, even though there's multiple main characters. I guess Mark would technically be the main character. But Rose, at the beginning of the movie, she finds this book at this antique dealer. And it's the Mother's Trilogy. And so she becomes curious about that. And her curiosity leads her to the cellar where she goes down. And then she ends up going underwater because she drops, it looks like a pin that's attached to her necklace. And she drops it down there. And there's this really beautiful sequence. This underwater sequence, it's unlike anything I've ever seen, especially for like an Italian horror film. And it's interesting how you have this character Rose swimming under the water. And anytime you have a character swimming underwater, it kind of heightens the tension because you never know what they're going to come upon. It reminded me of that scene in Jaws where they come upon that floating head, and that's kind of what happens in this scene. She sees this like floating corpse, and it's an oh shit moment. But Argento takes his time getting through that sequence. You know, the scene goes on for quite a while, and then eventually, boom, these corpses. But she ends up getting out of there, and she writes this letter to her brother Mark, who is in Rome. He's going to this like musical school, and he has this friend Sarah. He's sitting in music class, and he sees this like hypnotic student with this cat. And you know that this girl is in the middle of this class and she's got a cat, so you know something's definitely weird there, something rotten in Denmark. And she takes his attention away from the letter, and so then Sarah finds the letter. She ends up going down what I guess I'd call the proverbial rabbit hole, because there's a lot of rabbit holes in this movie. It's a character, following breadcrumbs pretty much, and that's what this character does. But really the basic plot line here is that these characters, Rose, Mark, and Sarah, they all succumb to the trappings of this coven, this witch coven. Mark ends up going to New York for his sister Rose. And the reason the movie is called Inferno, I think it's not just literal, but it's also kind of symbolic, because they go deeper and deeper into this witch coven, but also like their own sanity. And as the movie goes on, it gets a little bit more chaotic and frantic. Now, let's go behind the scenes of this movie a little bit. Dario Argento has stated that this is probably his least favorite film, just because he was sick. He had hepatitis during the making of this film, and so he was so sick at some points he literally was bedridden, so he couldn't step in to direct. And I can imagine the frustration of a director not being able to do his own work. And he had Mario Bava come in and fill quite a few gaps in the production. And Mario Bava is uncredited for a lot of the work that he did in this film, even right down to straight up directing. Irene Miracle has stated that Bava filmed the underwater sequence. You know, he's not credited, but yeah, she stated he actually did all that. And I think those kinks in the production, it kind of shows up on film. This isn't as a well-structured film as Suspiria is. It's got a lot of very interesting elements. It's definitely one that will stay on your mind after you watch it, which is a good thing. But it has some head-scratching moments for sure. And a lot of these are attributed to just Italian horror norms. You know, there is a flavor to Italian horror it's kind of silly. Like, even my wife, she wasn't really watching this movie, but she kind of peeked up because I was like giving it a second watch. Because I like to do that when I review movies. I do like an in-depth watch so I can really focus on what's going on, and then the second watch, sometimes I'll just have subtitles on so I can see what the characters are saying. And my wife literally looked up and she was like, wow, it was a scene of violence, and she was just wondering why the blood was just so bright red. And I was like, well, that's an Italian horror trope. They always have that signature bright red blood. And it's kind of a charming thing that we've come to know and love. And there's a lot of it. They love blood in Italian horror films. Now, there's a lot of violence in this movie. It takes a while to get to that violence, but once it does happen, the scenes are pretty bloody and creative. First off, you got Sarah. She goes into this like library, and eventually she ends up coming to like the basement area, and it gets a lot darker, steamier. And she comes upon this like demon-looking killer type guy, and he attacks her, and so she like runs from him, comes upon this guy Carlo to protect her, which is very strange. Like, you would not see that today. Just a complete stranger that you confide in to save you from danger. Not safe at all, but that's what she does. Luckily, Carlo ends up being a decent guy, but both of them end up dead anyway, and the way the scene plays out, it's Italian horror bloody goodness is what it is. He comes around the corner and he's got this freaking knife in his neck. He's crawling all over her and her blood and everything. It's just very graphic and gratuitous. And eventually she gets like stabbed right in the back. This is stuff that you don't normally see in like normal slasher movies, and that's part of the charm of Italian horror films. They're not afraid to go there. Probably one of the most iconic scenes is Rose's death. Just because, during the scene, it's stretched out. All these scenes are stretched out. But I call him the demon guy. He's got these weird fingers, and he breaks through this window, and then this really iconic shot of his fingers like going over her face and pulling her down. Grabbing the window and pulling it down and impaling her across her neck. But every one of these death scenes, they're accented by Roman Albani's cinematography. It's just gorgeous. It's beautiful. It takes something ugly and makes it look beautiful, which is another trope of Italian horror that you don't see in American cinema that much. They keep the dirty with the violence and they keep the beauty with the characters. Those two intertwine in Italian horror quite often. Now, there are some problems with this movie for sure. If you don't like animal violence, then you're probably not going to like this movie. You will probably not like cats after this movie because there's so many freaking cats. And there is like this scene where Dario Argento, she's attacked by all these cats and then stabbed. The cats just add this feeling of uncomfortableness as you watch it. And plus, when we see animals, especially like a large number of them, commit violence, it makes us feel uneasy. And then right after that, you got the antique dealer getting attacked by these rats. So to me, it felt like a little repetitive. And I'm just not the biggest fan, I guess, of animal death scenes. I don't hate them all, but for some reason in this scene, it really gets under your skin, which is what it's supposed to do, but I just didn't find it as satisfying. Overall, I just didn't find the story as well structured and as satisfying as Suspiria was. By the time you get to the unveiling of, like, I guess the boss witch is what I would call her, which goes by the name of Mater Tenebrarum. She is the witch that's wreaking havoc and could cause like global domination with the other two witches. That's the big reveal at the end of this movie. Mark is left to his own devices to try to put an end to all this. But by the time you get there, you're almost like exhausted. Like I said, it's very thought-provoking, and you can't get the movie out of your head after you watch it. I've watched it twice. It's just not a movie that I'll watch as often as I'll watch Suspiria, and I've heard even worse things about the third movie. But I do appreciate this movie for what it is, and I'm curious to see what Argento could have done with it had he not been so sick. But I mean, the story's there, and it's a whacked out story. But overall, I'm gonna give it like a high humdrum. I'm glad I have it in my collection for sure, and it's still got a lot of that great Italian horror goodness. The violence in this movie really, really delivers. So there's a lot going for it. Some really beautiful sequences. If anything, you could have this movie on in the background, no sound, and just enjoy the cinematography, because the cinematography is just glorious. Also, Keith Emerson did the score for this movie, and the score is very different than what you got in Suspiria with Goblin. Goblin, they have their own flavor. It's a band type of sound, whereas this one sounded more bombastic and orchestral, and I think it worked for this movie. It's just not as memorable as Goblin, but who is going to be as memorable as Goblin? So anyway, guys, that's my review for Inferno. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on this movie. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day, and on Fridays we do Free for Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and Drumdum out.